Chapter 7 Northward Bound. Santa called to the reindeer as they sped through the forest and let out a boisterous woo-hoo as Dasher leapt into the air. The team and sleigh launched upward into the frozen storm. Jimmy peered over the side of the sleigh at the treetops which raced by just inches below. The light from Dasher's antlers cast a warm glow over them and flashed off of the snow-covered floor beyond. "I always loved that part," Santa said as the sleigh climbed. The forest fell away and vanished below the snow-burdened clouds. There was a brief moment when all Jimmy could see was dark gray mist, and then the sleigh burst through the storm and into crisp, clear night air. The stars glimmered as bright as Jimmy had ever seen, and the moon was even more brilliant. "They look like silver waves, don't they?" Santa said, pointing down to the ocean of clouds below. Jimmy hung his head over the side of the sleigh and marveled. "They do. They look like silver cotton candy." Santa glanced back down at the clouds and began to laugh. "I've never thought of them like that, but I'd have to agree. I wonder if the elves could figure that out. Remind me to ask them sometime." "Silver cotton candy indeed. You should see the clouds in July just before dusk or right before dawn. Then they really look like cotton candy." "I would like to see that someday," Jimmy replied. Santa looked over and patted Jimmy on the shoulder. "Perhaps you will, Jim. Perhaps you will." The two sat in silence for a while as Dasher led the team north. Jimmy stared about as clouds parted or mountains broke their surface. Santa poured them more cocoa and produced a small silver tray of cookies which he sat between them. The night air was cold, but the sleigh seemed to warm itself every now and then. Jimmy's new coat and boots did a wonderful job at combating the chilly wind whenever it crept in. As the moon vanished over the horizon, Dasher's antlers grew brighter, and hundreds of tiny candles sprung to life around the sleigh's frame. "Those are pretty," Jimmy said when the candles materialized. "You like them?" Santa asked. "Elven flame again. I've traveled about as fast as the reindeer dare go, and I've never seen a single one of their flames so much as flicker in the wind. They help keep the cabin cozy and bright as we fly, too. Speaking of which, are you warm enough?" Jimmy nodded. Good, good. This new sleigh sure is a bit warmer than the first one." "Did the elves build it?" Jimmy asked. "Oh, the elves and I worked on this one for the better part of a year. They are masters of most crafts, but they are exceptionally gifted when it comes to designing sleighs. The seats warm themselves, the candles appear when it gets too dark, even the reins are warm to the touch when they need be. I wish my parents' car had heated seats. I have to crawl under a blanket in the winter whenever we drive anywhere." Santa laughed. "Well, don't you worry. I'm currently working with a few children on that. Hopefully, when they are grown, a few of them will remember our designs." Jimmy grinned. "You know, my grandfather told me he met you once." "Young James? Oh, he most certainly did. In fact, I met all of your grandparents at one time or another, both on your father's side of the family as well as your mother's. They were wonderful people." Jimmy nodded. "I wish I had known them longer." "Well, Jim, it's not the amount of time you spend with those you love. It's the quality of the time spent. But I must confess, I miss them quite a bit as well." "Grandpa James said you were dressed in green when he met you. Green and blue. Do you not always wear the red outfit?" "Oh, no, but I do believe it's my favorite. The elves have made me many fine garments over the years. I have everything from white and gold to purple and orange. But the red just does something for me. Ah, yes, speaking of the elves, would you like to visit with them for a while?" Santa asked. Jimmy looked over his shoulder and into the red velvet bag. All he could see was shadows beyond the opening. "Will fit?" he asked. Santa grinned and winked. "If I can fit, anyone can." Jimmy laughed and watched as Santa tied the reins to a small silver bell on the sleigh's frame. "All right, Dasher. Young Master Jim and I are going to retire for a time. You know the way. Straight and true, if you please." From the front of the team, Dasher turned his head and nodded. "Shall we?" Santa asked. Jimmy agreed, and Santa held open the bag. A warm gust of air rushed out, as did an inviting amber light. The sound of music and laughter filled the sleigh, along with the scent of even more food and candies. "After you," Santa said. Jimmy grinned and climbed over the back of the sleigh and into the rucksack. As he crawled along, he found himself navigating a rather lengthy and rather soft velvet tunnel. The air grew warmer, and the sounds of the wind outside faded behind him the further along he went. After a short time, almost all of the candlelight pouring into the mysterious sack behind him faded away, and Jimmy moved forward in almost complete darkness. It was a strange sensation of impractical physics. Jimmy knew he must have crawled at least the distance of one of the long hallways back at the ward, but that was impossible, wasn't it? Though come to think of it, everything about tonight was impossible. That's just how magic is. Just as he was wondering how much further there was to go, amber light appeared in the distance. Jimmy continued on and soon found himself looking down upon an enormous room. Just below him, a wooden slide emptied out onto what looked like the exact same chair he'd used back in the forest. Jimmy inched himself out, pushed off, and raced towards the floor of the great room below. A few seconds later, he landed in his chair with a plop and a laugh. His seat slid to the right, and out popped Santa onto his own matching chair. Santa looked over at Jimmy and stood. "I told you we'd fit," he said. He turned to the room before them and motioned. "Welcome to the best travel lodge this side of the equator." "Get it? Travel lodge?" he asked and winked. "It's a lodge that travels." Jimmy laughed. The room was enormous. It easily dwarfed the children's ward. The second thought of the hospital sent a short-lived chill into Jimmy's stomach, but he pushed it away and continued to inspect his new surroundings. 3 long wooden tables, the color of dark caramel, stretched the entire length of the room, and Christmas trees lined the walls, each decorated more brilliantly than the next. Beautifully crafted gold chandeliers hung from the ceiling, although they looked as if they'd been grown and not crafted. Giant red and green candles were fixed to each, casting a wonderful warm glow all about. At the far end of the room stood a large wooden bar where silver steins of eggnog and cider were being served. Behind the bar stood dozens upon dozens of large barrels, each with its own ornate label carved onto the front. They had been stacked one atop the other a good 30 feet into the air. There was everything from port to wine to strawberry ale. There were also cinnamon ciders, cocos, and juice of every flavor. "Would you like some eggnog?" Santa asked. "Or would you like to try one of the sodas? Perhaps a chocolate blueberry?" Jimmy tore his gaze from the festive room and looked up at Santa. "Chocolate and blueberry?" Santa began to laugh. "It's quite good." "Shall we?" he asked, and began threading his way through the tables and the elves. Jimmy followed and found himself humming along to the various holiday tunes drifting into the air like some magical breeze. The two reached the bar and were again greeted by Cricken, who now sported a long brown apron adorned with dozens of tiny silver bells. "Greetings," the elf said. "Hello again, Cricken," Santa replied. "We'll have 2 chocolate blueberry sodas, if you please." Cricken nodded and grinned. "It's especially good this year, Santa. The bears sure know how to grow those blueberries," he said, and skipped off to a tall ladder leading up to one of the topmost barrels. "Yes, they do," Santa agreed. "Bears?" Jimmy asked. "Oh, yes. There are no better berry growers in the world, if you ask me. They have a nose for it, you know. Master Huck is our lead berry grower. He and Miss Olivia raise the most delicious fruits you've ever had the pleasure to taste. Their bear friends are masters at cultivating and harvesting berries of all types." Cricken scaled the ladder to a brilliant indigo-stained barrel. Jimmy marveled at how high the little elf climbed and with such speed and grace. Cricken then reached into his pocket and produced a shining silver tap, which he pressed through the wood with ease. He twisted the device several times and pulled 2 steins from behind his apron, which he then filled with a dark blue frothy liquid. When both steins were full, Cricken held each in one hand, closed off his tap, and in one well-balanced maneuver slid down the ladder back to the bar. He never spilled a drop. "Here you are, 2 chocolate blueberry sodas. Would you like those with or without vanilla ice cream?" Cricken asked. Santa looked at Jimmy. With, please," Jimmy replied. "And I will have the same," Santa added. Cricken reached back behind his apron and produced an already full ice cream scoop. He dropped a round ball of the treat into each drink, returned the scoop to whatever secret hiding spot from whence it had come, and placed long straws and spoons into each soda. "Enjoy," Cricken said, and raced off to fill another order further down the line. "After you," Santa said. Jimmy pulled his stein closer and took a long sip from the straw. The soda tasted just as he thought it would. Bubbly, chocolatey, blueberry-y, and vanilla-y. "That is really, really good," Jimmy said. Santa smiled and sipped his own soda, careful not to get any on his beard. Cricken reappeared a second later. "I almost forgot," he said. "We have some new straws this year. Cinnamon curlicues, they're calling them. Try the soda through these." Cricken placed the 2 new straws into each stein and sped away again. Santa and Jimmy marveled over the 2 curly straws and sipped their drinks through their new utensils. "That's even better," Jimmy said. Santa was too busy nodding in agreement and sucking his new straw to reply, but he winked approval.